He's undoubtedly and incomparably the top legal mind of the country. With over 7 decades in the Supreme Court behind him, he's seen many judges and many Chief Justices come and go. We are honored to be joined by a legal voice like none other, Mr. Fali Nariman. Thank you so much for speaking to India today. Sir, you've recently come out with your opinion regarding the elevation, rather non-elevation, of Justice S Muralidhar, who was one of the top best High Court judges that the country has seen, who was not brought to the Supreme Court. What was the reason for you to ask this question of the Supreme Court regarding Justice Muralidhar's elevation?
It was not to bring the Supreme Court into a bad light. That was not the intention. The intention was to give a wider perspective to this method of appointing judges or not appointing judges from the High Courts to the Supreme Court. And because that has been always a source of complaint, of anguish of various people. But let me go back to the beginning. You see, it was 35 years ago when the United Nations set out a set of basic principles for the independence of the judiciary. It was decided by the General Assembly unanimously. There was no dissent at all. And they said every country has to make its own constitution and decide according to its constitution what the position should be. But there are some minimum requirements. And the minimum requirement is that there should be a judiciary which is independent, decides independently, and manned by persons of integrity. Now, we have fulfilled all those norms. There is no doubt about it in our constitution. The article itself says. But in order to safeguard the question as to how people should be appointed, everywhere in the world, they are only appointed by the executive, whether you like it or not. But it has to be in consultation with the Chief Justice.
Is the question on the independence of the judiciary itself at this point?
At the moment, yes, the way it has worked out. You see, each country has its own background. Each country has its own background, how it has worked out. In the first 10 years or 15 years of the Constitution, there was no difficulty. In fact, statistics show that almost in all cases except one or two, the opinion of the Chief Justice of India, and that was the only requirement, the opinion of Chief Justice of India should be final. And that happened to be the practice right through for about 10 to 12 or 13 or 14 or 15 years. But then came the judgment in one of the judges' cases where by a majority they decided that according to the text of the Constitution, it said it consultation with the Chief Justice. It doesn't mean with the concurrence of the Chief Justice.
Correct.
And that was the controversy. So by a majority of 4-3, they said that no, it is the executive which will appoint.
Right.
And without, whether in consultation, but not certainly not with concurrence.
No.
And then the trouble that arose was, as you know, next 10 years, 20 years, that judges were appointed, that the executive then assumed that it was entitled to appoint whomsoever they please,
right,
which became another problem.
But the trouble that was happening at that time, the dissatisfaction amongst the judiciary and the government, was also because the judiciary was trying to be fiercely independent.
Yes.
And they were trying to ensure that the judges that they
Absolutely,
recommend...
because that is in consonance with the United Nations
Correct.
general principle.
Correct. So what is the situation that's different now? Do you think?
No, you see, what is different now is that there was, having regard to the background, we had a judgment of 9 judges which said ultimately that no, the ultimate choice of the person to be appointed, whether as a High Court judge, person to be transferred from a High Court judge from one High Court to another, person to be appointed as Supreme Court judge, would be ultimately decided in consultation with government, but the ultimate choice will have to be not by not of the Chief Justice, but of the first 3 judges of the Supreme Court, which was later altered to the first 5.
Right. But what do the judges do? when the government just sits on the recommendations endlessly. I mean, earlier also regarding certain High Court judges, we saw that recommendations were made, they reiterated them, they gave out very detailed Collegium resolutions, but the government just did not move.
You see, this has happened on two occasions with two separate governments. It has happened with the Congress government, it has happened with the BJP, the NJD government, and again with the super majority BJP government. No difficulty at all. They all behave in the same way. Generally, they do follow. Generally, they do follow, but not always. But now, the present interview and the present arises because of that article which appeared yesterday or the day before.
Right.
And that article only goes to show that sometimes this happens. It's a rare case, but it's a very important case. A man who is of outstanding ability, who is overlooked, not only overlooked as when he retires at 62, but a lot of other people who are great appointed to the highest court, and this man is left out.
Right.
Without any explanation at all. Now, whether there should be an explanation, there should not be an explanation, to whom should that explanation be given? These are all matters to be thought of. They are all matters to be debated. It's not as if one is carping at the Supreme Court decision. They have to consider this. But my own view has always been that it is not the job of judges to judge judges. It is a job of judges to judge cases. Okay. And they do it pretty well in our country. They have done it pretty well for last 70 odd years, with a few exceptions here and there, but they have all got ironed out from court to court. So I still personally feel that there should be a national commission for appointment of judges and for transfer of judges. But the dominant voice should be with the three senior most or five senior most judges of the Supreme Court. It can't be otherwise. And that is why the Venkatachalaya Commission recommendations should have been accepted. They were accepted. A bill was passed in 2003. But unfortunately that bill lapsed, not because there was opposition, but because the elections were called. That's the only reason.
In your autobiography, you've also written about how such arbitrary transfers was something that was happening at the time of the emergency.
Oh yes, the emergency was terrible, yes.
So when it
it was much worse. The emergency can't compare. People compare what the present state of affairs with the emergency. I don't agree at all.
Right.
The emergency was something much worse, and I know, I lived through the emergency.
Right.
I resigned during the emergency.
Right.
So I know exactly how the emergency worked. And it was something atrocious, much worse.
But when it comes to the aspect of judicial appointments, do you think the Supreme Court judges, the Collegium, the 5 judges to decide this, have now, by not recommending Justice Muralidhar, have subscribed to the government's point of view and they are not standing up for
So it appears. We can't say definitely because nobody knows why, what. We are not party to the confabulations that took place. So it's for them to, whether to assert it or not assert. So quite frankly, I don't agree with the title of my article also, because that was put in by the editor. But in any case, as to the question for the Supreme Court to answer, they don't have to answer anybody. I quite agree. They don't have to answer. But we have the right to say something about it.
But they also have to answer their own conscience at the end of the day.
That's correct. And somebody has to say something, but nobody is saying something. That's the problem. And here's a person, and this could happen again and again. It has happened once before. As I said the other day, Justice S was a very distinguished judge of the Bombay High Court. He later went as Chief Justice of Karnataka. He was just not brought up. And there's no explanation why he was not brought up. He was an outstanding judge.
Right.
He cleared a lot of arrears in the Bombay High Court. Tremendous. And he was a man fit to become, by all accounts. That's sort of a consensus by everybody.
Right.
and had a very good brain and a very good grasp of the subject, but somehow he didn't turn up.
The Collegium had also recommended Justice Muralidhar's name to be the Chief Justice of the Madras High Court, which is one of the most respected high courts in the country.
The original three
Correct.
chartered high courts of British
Absolutely.
India.
And they had even reiterated his name, but the government never acted on it and the Collegium did nothing.
No, they did not. They withdrew it.
They withdrew it, right?
Which was that. If
Correct.
they'd done nothing, I wouldn't have bothered.
Right.
Because then it was
correct.
beyond their control. But
They
they
withdrew
withdrew it. And we have no explanation of why they withdrew it. That was unfortunate, most unfortunate. That's all I can say.
But what does this tell you about the state of the judiciary in the country
No,
in the
it
present
doesn't
day?
tell you anything about the state of the judiciary. State of the judiciary is healthy and it's good. And
No,
I
not
don't
with
want
respect
people,
to-
I don't want people around who's listening to this to go away with the idea that the state of the judiciary is something to be desired. No, on the contrary. They deliver judgments, they give verdicts against the government,
Right.
they give verdicts for the government. It depends on what the law is. They have to decide. They are the final arbiter of what is constitutional, what is the law, and what is correct. And that we have to accept. So therefore, we have to accept this. We have to accept this. But the problem today is that unlike a judgment in a case, we don't have any reason why this person, who is otherwise of outstanding ability, was and recommended as Chief Justice of one of the three chartered high courts of British India, Madras. It was suddenly withdrawn. Why was it withdrawn? Nobody quite
I
knows.
think you had said that judges are very good at writing judgments, but not at appointing judges.
That's the problem. That seems to be the position.
Right.
And therefore, perhaps it should go to another body where the judges, of course, are in majority, like the Venkatachala, Chief Justice Venkatachala had suggested, and which was actually accepted by the BJP government itself. A bill was introduced. That there should be 5 persons in that commission. 3 judges, senior judges of the Supreme Court, the law minister. There has to be an outsider,
Right.
law minister, and one
Eminent
outsider,
person,
total
yeah.
outsider, who's an expert.
Right.
Therefore, but the majority had to be with the judiciary. But unfortunately, that has not been followed.
Do you think there's an urgent need to revamp how the process of judicial appointments
Yes, absolutely.
exists in the country?
And particularly transfers.
Right.
You see, our constitution under Article 222 provides that High Court judges, Supreme Court judges can't be transferred because there's nowhere to go. But the High Court judges can be transferred from one High Court to another. And we have had the spectacle some years ago of a Chief Justice of the Madras High Court being transferred to a Sikkim High
Right.
Court where there are only 3 judges.
Yes.
Which sounds absurd.
Yes.
And to me, at least, it sounds very shocking that this happened. But it did happen.
Yes.
That is the unfortunate.
And you've specially spoken about in your book the need to disband this collegium, the 5 judges deciding.
Yes, I agree.
the
Because,
judicial appointments.
you see, there's nothing great about the 5. Why shouldn't it be the whole court?
Right.
The entire Supreme Court, the man who's 6 and 7 and 8 and 9,
Right.
may have some better input.
Right.
But unfortunately, since you create this position of 5 or 3 or whatever it is, you exclude all the others,
Right.
which should never be. It should be the whole court. I mean, roughly speaking, the whole court.
Right.
Therefore, the Chief Justice has to take his colleagues into consultation and then roughly come to a consensus, because they can't be unanimous every time. It has to be a consensus.
So what do you think has changed over time? Because earlier the judges...
Human nature has changed. Human
Right.
beings have changed. You can see it all over. In my life, in my 75 years at the bar, I see a tremendous change.
No, I ask you because...
Technology has changed. Everything has
Absolutely.
changed. Everything has
No, I
changed.
ask you because you've spoken extensively about how former judges used to actively consult not just other judges but even senior lawyers.
Oh yes, I've
You
been
have
consulted. Yes.
multiple times you have recommended names.
Yes, correct.
Judges have gone through. Justice Eradi, like we were talking
Yes,
about, of the
correct.
Kerala High Court,
Correct.
got appointed to the Supreme Court
Yes.
because you had seen him in the Kerala High Court and
correct.
spoken to the Supreme Court judges.
In fact, I must tell you that if you want a precedent, there was one Chief Justice who because Venugopal and I had objected to the transfer of a particular High Court judge from Delhi to Madras. And we had written about it and to the Chief Justice. And since we had objected, the Chief Justice, along with 3 colleagues of his, specially interviewed us and wanted to know why we were objecting. And we went and told him. And ultimately, that gentleman who was transferred did go, but then he was brought back to Delhi. So you see, these things do work.
Right.
They do work at times.
So are we hoping that through this question that you didn't mean to ask to the Supreme Court, but you've asked, do you think we're expecting for anything on the ground to really change?
I don't know. You have to ask the judges. You don't ask me. I don't
But are
know.
you expecting a response? No.
I don't think so. I don't think there'll be any response. But there has to be a lively discussion and a debate about it. Not about this particular individual. Now it's gone beyond repair, as it were. So the man is retired. He's already, nobody takes back a retired judge.
Correct.
But these things, you see, leave a bad taste in the mouth, unless one knows what happened.
Right.
And that's why I have taken this up, not only because I know this gentleman, he's a man of great integrity also. There's not a whisper about him. There's not one man who said that he's a nasty fellow, he talks too much or any such thing. Not at all. I mean, on the contrary. And that's what's upset me.
Who is to be held responsible? Is it both the sides?
Yes, both the sides. Yeah, both
Are they
sides.
equally responsible?
I think so. I think the system is responsible.
Right.
The system is responsible. We have to dig a little more to find out a better system. Because, as you know, the UN general principles have left it to the Constitution. You decide according to your own Constitution, but take men and women of integrity and take men and women of capacity and competence. That's all that is required. And that has been happening as a general rule. But there are exceptions, and this is one of those outstanding exceptions about which we have to sound the bugle and the drum and so on.
Absolutely. So what would your advice be for a change to be brought in the system so that all of these discrepancies can be done away with?
In the first place, we should have a commission.
Right.
That's basic.
With
that
majority
commission
judges.
should have, yes, that commission should also have. But there should also be a meaningful consultation amongst judges themselves. You see, the fact that you have 5 people or 3 people or 7 people doesn't mean you exclude all the others. There may be the 5th man or the 7th man or the last man who is appointed on the bench might be able to say something about, if only he's asked. Why should he stick his neck out?
Do you think the current Collegium has closed itself off to outside?
Absolutely, because it's meant to be structured like that. Right. That is the unfortunate part. That's how it's structured. You can't blame it. You see, it was originally 3. By another bench judgment of 9, later, which was quite unnecessary, of course, as I have already said. But whatever the reason, there is now of the 5. And now there's also a 6th judge, because if none of the others will become Chief Justices, then the next person to become Chief Justice is also be a member.
Correct.
So they have widened the group which decide. But I think it should be much wider. Even if you have the Collegium system, it should be much wider. The Chief Justice should ask all his colleagues.
For a little bit in the beginning of the year, it seemed like the Collegium is trying to take steps towards transparency. The kind of resolutions that we saw actually had reasons for why a judge was recommended.
This also has a very bad connotation. You see, 5 out of 30 or 32, which means as if the 5 are superior. In fact, at one time, not in the currency of the present Chief Justice, but about 3 or 4 Chief Justices before, I know that when a Chief Justice came in, he had 5 separate chairs put for tea time for the 5 judges, and only it was for those 5 judges who sat on those high chairs. It's really absurd. It's ridiculous. They are all equal. All the judges of the Supreme Court, 1 to 34, they are all equal. I have no doubt about it. I mean, the fact that they've come up to the highest court must make them all equal.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So they should be treated equally, including consultation. I'm now on the system. Keep the system, all right. But consult everybody.
Right.
See that everybody is asked also, not merely the first five. Why should the first five only tell you whether Mr. X should be brought or should not be brought?
Correct. To what extent do you think politics has a role to play in this?
No, you see, politics has a role in every decision. Please remember, the highest court is dealing with politics. What do you think is this Kashmir case which is going on before the Supreme Court, a constitutional bench of the Supreme Court just now? What is it about except politics? So the judges have to decide, but they don't decide on politics. They will have to decide on constitution. Is it constitutional what has been done, or is it unconstitutional? If it's constitutional, it must be affirmed. If it's unconstitutional, it has to be struck down. That's all. So don't, I mean, let's not mix it up with, say, politics. We are all have to live with politics. Right. You can't divorce yourself with politics. You can't say, I won't look at anything which is political. But all cases, most of the cases which come up are political.
Correct.
But it's not that the judges decide politically. No. They decide in accordance with what they believe to be the position in law and the constitution.
But in Justice Pence's case that you referred to, there was a certain level of politics amongst judges that came at play.
That politics amongst judges in that loose sense, yes, perhaps yes, perhaps yes, perhaps yes, perhaps yes.
So do you think it's a similar case in Justice Muralidhar's case?
I don't know. I wouldn't speculate at all.
Right.
I think this man was a good, outstanding example of a person who ought to have been brought, and who unfortunately, even in the opinion of the Collegium themselves, he was outstanding, otherwise he wouldn't have been recommended as Chief Justice of Madras High Court.
Right. Do you think there was injustice to Justice Muralidhar by not bringing him to the Supreme Court, letting him retire?
In an individual case, yes. Yes, certainly. Yes, certainly. It was an injustice, in my humble opinion. And unless somebody tells me that, no, you are wrong because of X, Y, and Z. But I don't know the X, Y, and Z.
Right. So, well, all we can do is hope that the judges are listening.
Yes, I have no doubt. No, it doesn't matter whether the judges listen or not. But the intelligent public, the people who count, etc. in the country, must wake up to this and come to some sort of conclusion which is acceptable to all.
Right. So, there you have it, Mr. Fali Nariman. In absolutely clear terms, important questions need to be asked, and there is a serious requirement for a complete overhaul of how judges are appointed in India. Thank you so much, sir, for taking time out and speaking to India today.
Thank you.
Hope to see you again. Thank you.